239 people vanished. No distress call. No debris. No explanation. On March 8, 2014, flight MH370 took off and disappeared into an empty sky. But what happened in those final 7 minutes? Why did the aircraft change direction? Why did the transponder go dark? And why, after 10 years, does the world still have no answers? Tonight, we reconstruct the final moments of MH370, analyze the impossible flight path, and uncover the 9 theories governments don't want to talk about. March 8, 2014. 12:41 a.m., Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 takes off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The sky is calm. The crew is experienced. And nothing, absolutely nothing, suggests that this flight will become the greatest aviation mystery of our time. For the first 40 minutes, everything is routine. Passengers are settling in. The aircraft, a Boeing 777, is cruising smoothly toward Beijing. The captain, Zahir Ahmad Shah, communicates with air traffic control. His voice is steady, relaxed, almost bored. Then comes the moment everyone remembers. "Good night, Malaysian 370. These would be the last words ever heard from MH370. Minutes later, the aircraft crosses the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace and vanishes. Not gradually. Not with warning. Not with a distress call. Instantly. At 1:21 a.m., the transponder, the device that broadcasts the plane's identity and altitude, goes dark. To the outside world, flight MH370 simply stops existing. Air traffic controllers attempt to contact the crew. No response. Vietnam calls Malaysia. Malaysia calls back. Confusion spreads through both control rooms. At first, they assume a technical glitch. Boeing 777s don't just disappear. But then, investigators notice something chilling. Even though the plane no longer appears on civilian radar, military radar, which cannot be turned off by accident, shows MH370 performing a sharp, deliberate turn. The aircraft swings southwest, back across Malaysia, toward the Strait of Malacca. This is not the path to Beijing. This is not an emergency descent. This is intentional course deviation. And whoever is controlling the plane knows exactly what they're doing. As the aircraft crosses peninsular Malaysia in the darkness of early morning, it flies over several major cities. Yet no one on the ground sees or hears anything unusual. The radar track then shows MH370 heading northwest, toward a narrow gap between Thai and Malaysian military radar systems. Almost like someone is threading a needle, navigating through one of the few regions in Southeast Asia, where a large aircraft can move without being tracked continuously. But even this isn't the most disturbing part. At 1:37 a.m., the plane should send an automated system ping, a simple "I'm alive" message. But the signal doesn't arrive. Then at 2:03 a.m., after more than 40 minutes of silence, the plane suddenly reconnects with the satellite. But without turning the transponder back on. It's as if MH370 is floating in a twilight zone between being visible and invisible. Investigators later realize these satellite handshakes will become the only clues to the flight's final path, long after radar coverage ends. But at this moment, in the early hours of that night, nobody knows any of this. All they know is that 239 people are missing. A plane that was supposed to land in Beijing at 6:30 a.m. never arrives. Families wait at the airport in silence, watching the arrival board freeze at delayed. Inside Malaysia's control center, tension turns into panic. Officials begin calling nearby countries, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, begging for any sign of the aircraft. Every answer is the same. We have nothing. But the truth is far stranger. MH370 hasn't crashed yet. It is still in the air. Still flying. Still moving deeper into the darkness. And in just a handful of minutes, the plane will leave the reach of any radar system on Earth, entering a region where no one can see it. By the time investigators piece together what happened in this window, those final minutes between 1:21 and 1:38 a.m., they will face a terrifying possibility that the disappearance of MH370 was not an accident, not a mechanical failure, but the result of a deliberate, calculated human act. And that whoever carried it out knew exactly how to vanish a modern aircraft in a world where vanishing should be impossible. What if no one on MH370 was alive? That is the chilling question behind the theory investigators call the ghost flight. To understand it, we need to go back to what MH370 did after it vanished from radar. According to satellite data, the aircraft continued flying for 6 more hours across one of the most remote regions of the planet, a route with no major navigation beacons, no commercial air traffic, and virtually zero radar coverage. This suggests something disturbing. The plane may have been flying on autopilot, with no conscious crew. The first clue: sudden loss of communication. A catastrophic failure inside the cockpit, like a fire or electrical arcing, could disable communications without immediately destroying the aircraft. But this doesn't explain the deliberate turn MH370 made toward the Strait of Malacca. That turn was precise, controlled, intentional. Which leads investigators to a darker thought. Did the pilots realize something was terribly wrong? Did they turn the plane around, trying to get back to Malaysia? If a rapid depressurization event occurred, such as an oxygen system failure, the crew would have less than 60 seconds to put on their masks before hypoxia sets in. After that, confusion, disorientation, loss of consciousness, and within minutes, the cockpit would fall silent. The cabin goes quiet, but the plane keeps flying. Imagine 239 people slowly passing out without understanding why. No screaming, no chaos, just a quiet, drifting cabin as oxygen levels drop unseen. The autopilot keeps the aircraft stable. The engines continue to run, and MH370 climbs to cruising altitude, becoming a ghost in the sky. What if no one on MH370 was alive? That is the chilling question behind the theory investigators call the ghost flight. To understand it, we need to go back to what MH370 did after it vanished from radar. According to satellite data, the aircraft continued flying for 6 more hours across one of the most remote regions of the planet, a route with no major navigation beacons, no commercial air traffic, and virtually zero radar coverage. This suggests something disturbing. The plane may have been flying on autopilot, with no conscious crew. The first clue: sudden loss of communication. A catastrophic failure inside the cockpit, like a fire or electrical arcing, could disable communications without immediately destroying the aircraft. But this doesn't explain the deliberate turn MH370 made toward the Strait of Malacca. That turn was precise, controlled, intentional. Which leads investigators to a darker thought. Did the pilots realize something was terribly wrong? Did they turn the plane around, trying to get back to Malaysia? If a rapid depressurization event occurred, such as an oxygen system failure, the crew would have less than 60 seconds to put on their masks before hypoxia sets in. After that, confusion, disorientation, loss of consciousness, and within minutes, the cockpit would fall silent. The cabin goes quiet, but the plane keeps flying. Imagine 239 people slowly passing out without understanding why. No screaming, no chaos, just a quiet, drifting cabin as oxygen levels drop unseen. The autopilot keeps the aircraft stable. The engines continue to run, and MH370 climbs to cruising altitude, becoming a ghost in the sky. This explains why no distress call was made, no attempt to communicate was logged, no unusual cockpit audio was captured, Passengers never used their cell phones. The plane followed a smooth, predictable path. But the ghost flight theory has a fatal flaw. It cannot explain why the plane made a perfect left turn back across the Malaysian peninsula. Autopilot alone cannot do that. Someone had to reprogram the route. Someone breathing. Someone conscious. At least, in those first minutes. The plane continues into the void. Once the aircraft re-entered open airspace, beyond radar coverage, it likely continued on autopilot until running out of fuel. At around 7 hours and 38 minutes after takeoff, the engines would starve, lose thrust, and flame out. The Boeing 777 would then begin a slow descent, either gliding or spiraling downward, depending on the angle. This is where things split into two horrifying possibilities. One, a gentle ocean ditching. The pilot remained conscious, guiding the plane into the water, with minimal breakup. This would explain the lack of debris. Two, a high-speed spiral. If everyone was unconscious, the autopilot disengages, the aircraft pitches down, and MH370 hits the ocean at extreme velocity. In this scenario, the ocean would swallow the aircraft in seconds, leaving almost no floating wreckage. But there's one more problem. If MH370 was truly a ghost flight, the aircraft should have followed a smooth, fuel-optimized track. But the satellite handshake data suggests the plane changed altitude repeatedly during its final hour. This is almost impossible for an autopilot-only aircraft. Someone or something was still influencing the flight path. Which brings investigators to the next, and far more controversial question. If the plane wasn't flying by itself, then who was controlling MH370? And why did they disappear in a way no one could trace? For months after the disappearance of MH370, investigators kept repeating the same message. We have found no evidence of pilot involvement. But behind closed doors, a very different story was unfolding. In the captain's home, inside a quiet suburb of Kuala Lumpur, police discovered something that would change the investigation forever. A personal flight simulator. At first, it seemed harmless. Many pilots use them to practice. Nothing unusual there. But when forensic analysts began recovering deleted files from the hard drive, they found a route that mirrored the suspected path of MH370. A route that ended in the deep, empty waters of the southern Indian Ocean. And suddenly, the world had a terrifying new question. Did Captain Zahari rehearse the disappearance? The deleted simulation, the data recovered from his computer, showed a long-haul flight that departed Kuala Lumpur and then diverted south, far away from any landmass. The simulated route stretched across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. And the most chilling detail? The simulation ended exactly where investigators eventually mapped the final pings of MH370. This wasn't random. This wasn't playful experimentation. This was deliberate. A rehearsal. Why was this information hidden? Malaysia did not release this data to the public until 2 years after the disappearance. When finally confronted, officials claimed the route was incomplete. It was only one scenario among many. It proves nothing. But independent analysts noticed patterns that were impossible to ignore. The simulator route matched the same southern corridor MH370 is believed to have taken. The flight duration on the simulator matched MH370's actual fuel range. The ending point: a remote location west of Australia, aligned with satellite handshake models. Even more disturbing, the route was intentionally deleted, not simply overwritten or abandoned. Someone wanted it gone. The captain, a portrait of contradictions. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was respected, experienced, known for his calm demeanor. Friends described him as intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply private. But investigators later discovered a troubling layer beneath that image. He had recently separated from his wife. He spent long hours alone. He had created political protest videos. And he expressed frustration with Malaysia's government and airline system. None of this proves guilt. But it raises a question that investigators were uncomfortable asking. Was MH370 a final statement? The Southern Indian Ocean route. Flight analysts who reconstructed the simulator scenario found a chilling pattern. Long, fuel-efficient cruise. Minimal course corrections. Gradual descent. Final shutdown over uninhabited waters. A place where no radar exists. Where debris sinks within minutes. Where recovery is nearly impossible. If someone wanted to make a plane disappear completely, this would be the only place on Earth capable of swallowing it whole. And that is exactly where the simulator route ended. Coincidence? Or blueprint? Official investigators continue to insist that the simulator proves nothing. But pilots, engineers, and aviation analysts around the world see it differently. A deleted route. A matching flight path. A perfect replication of MH370's final location. This is not coincidence. This is a blueprint. A plan. A plan someone practiced before carrying it out. And if the captain did rehearse the route, there is only one question left. Why? In the next chapter, we confront the most controversial theories. From political motives, to hijacking, to the possibility that MH370 was not under the captain's control at all. When investigators began analyzing the satellite handshake pings, they realized something astonishing. MH370 didn't simply vanish. It continued flying for hours, but in a direction no one expected. By the time radar contact was lost, the plane was positioned at a crossroads, a point in the sky, from which three radically different paths were possible. Tonight, we examine each of them. Route 1, the Northern Corridor. Central Asia, Taliban region, multiple restricted airspaces. This is the route most people don't know existed. After crossing the Strait of Malacca, MH370's trajectory could have taken it north, over Myanmar, Bangladesh, India, and into Central Asia. But here's the problem. This corridor passes through some of the most heavily militarized skies on Earth. China's Western Air Defense Zone, India's Northern Radar Belt, Pakistan's highly protected borders, Americans' surveillance posts. A Boeing 777, with its transponder turned off, entering these zones would trigger an instant response. And yet, no country reported any unidentified large aircraft on that night. No fighters launched. No warnings. No radar anomalies. Even if governments had something to hide, too many nations would need to cooperate for this silence to hold. For experts, the northern route is possible, but extremely unlikely. Route 2, the western turn toward the Maldives. The low-altitude bypass theory. This theory suggests MH370 dropped to a lower altitude to avoid radar detection and flew west, skimming past India, toward the Maldives. Why is this route taken seriously? Because on the morning after the disappearance, residents of Kuta Huvadu reported seeing a low-flying jumbo jet roaring over their island. The descriptions were detailed. Large wide-body plane. White fuselage with red stripes. Incredibly loud. Flying unusually low. Heading southeast. The Maldives government dismissed the sightings. But the people who reported the plane were fishermen, locals familiar with the sky and sea. They insisted what they saw wasn't normal. Could MH370 have attempted a low-altitude bypass to hide from radar? Yes. But this route would require dangerously precise fuel management. And the satellite handshake arcs do not fully align with the Maldives trajectory. Still, it remains one of the few cases where eyewitness testimony supports a western escape. Route 3, the Southern Indian Ocean. The route most experts agree on. This is the route that changes everything. After turning west and crossing Malaysia, MH370 appears to have turned south into one of the most remote, least monitored regions of the planet. No radar, no ships, no islands, just the empty, endless stretch of the Southern Indian Ocean. The satellite data relies on timing and frequency shifts, the Doppler effect, between the plane and the satellite. When plotted, these signals form a narrow curve, a corridor of possibility that stretches deep into the south. Analyzing the arc, investigators concluded the plane flew for over 7 hours at stable speed on autopilot. Slight course adjustments occurred. Fuel exhaustion happened around 8:19 a.m. A sharp descent followed. And here's the key. Every credible model places the final moments of MH370 within a specific region, west of Australia. A place so isolated that even modern search vessels struggle to map it. The Southern Corridor is the only route supported by black check mark emoji, satellite data, black check mark emoji, fuel analysis, black check mark emoji, autopilot models, black check mark emoji, ocean drift patterns, black check mark emoji, debris found along Africa's east coast, black check mark emoji, expert consensus. In short, this is the route the plane almost certainly took. The hardest question: if MH370 really flew into the Southern Indian Ocean, a place with nothing but cold waves and violent storms, then the next question becomes: did the plane dive into the ocean at high speed? Or did someone guide it into a controlled descent? One scenario leaves almost no debris. The other leaves almost nothing to find. Either way, the Southern Corridor is where MH370's journey almost certainly ended. But the more we learn about the flight path, the more we must confront the largest question of all. Was this a human decision? Or an event no one could have foreseen? In the next chapter, we explore the 9 theories governments and agencies rarely discuss. From hijacking to sabotage to possibilities far more unsettling. 10 years have passed, and flight MH370 is still missing. 239 people boarded a plane that night. They had families, destinations, plans, and lives that were never meant to end in silence. Search ships scanned hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. Satellites tracked faint signals, stretching across empty oceans. And yet, not a single piece of the main wreckage has ever been found. Every theory raises a new question. Every discovery opens a new mystery. And every clue seems to disappear just as quickly as it appears. Maybe MH370 was the result of mechanical failure. Maybe it was a human decision. Or maybe it was something no one has yet dared to imagine. But what we do know is this. For 7 hours, a modern aircraft flew across the sky, with no explanation, no communication, and no trace left behind. That should be impossible. But it happened. And until the day someone finds the truth beneath the ocean, until the day we know what really happened on that final, lonely flight, MH370 will remain one of the greatest mysteries of our time. This is where our search ends. But the real story is still out there. Somewhere. In the dark. Waiting to be found.